guys, I'm Jossie from One Project Closer, and today I'm here for our newest pro follow. This is Chris. He's a local contractor.
Today we're going to be in a bathroom. We're going to be doing some base trim, some shoe molding, some cabinetry toe kick, cabinet shoe molding. I'm going to show you how to cope, how to do returns on shoe, just a few minor details like that.
That's a lot of words. That's a lot of things. What are some of the tools we're going to need for this project, Chris?
Well, you need a miter saw is a big thing.
Okay.
Miter saw, you're going to need a nailer.
We have a special nailer today, right?
We do. We're using an 18 gauge DeWalt battery nailer. So we're going to be using that on some of the applications today. So we're going to go in first. We're going to measure everything out. One of the hardest things to do is measuring from an inside corner to an inside corner. Okay. It's best to come off of one of the inside corners, just say 5 inches. Okay. You make a mark on the wall. Okay, and then you measure from the other side over to that mark. So in this case, we had 39.5 inches to our mark, and I made a mark at 5 inches from the right side, so that's 44.5. So we made a piece at 44.5.
Perfect. So that's your pro tip for getting perfect inside measurements, everything. Excellent.
Everybody marks a little differently. So some people make a mark right on, and so when they go to cut, they just barely leave part of the line, so they're almost cutting the line in. Other people make a mark just over, and they'll just cut the line out completely. Other people make a mark shy, and then leave the line. So it kind of depends. Like, working with somebody, they go, "Oh, cut the line." That's just, they know what their mark is.
So when you're working with someone, it's really important to communicate about whether.
So typically, if they give you a piece, you'll say, "Leave the line." Leave the line.
Okay. So what is your preference?
I make a mark right on the exact measurement. So I'll make it at 44.5, and then I'll trim, and you'll barely see just part of that line, but you're pretty much just taking that line right out. Okay. Not too much, just barely.
Okay.
So that's
great. So another tricky aspect of the trim is coping.
Yes.
This is not a term that I'm familiar with. Explain to me what coping is.
So coping is another way of getting your pieces to join in an inside corner. You can cope different pieces. It could be base trim, it could be crown molding, it could be shoe molding. But it's helpful so when you have a corner that's not perfectly square. Which a lot
of the homes are not perfectly square.
No, you're not typically. You're going to get them close, but because there's mud, drywall mud built up on the corners, usually the corners are too built up, and so you have a difference. It's not exact 90. So what you can do, rather than cutting a 45-degree angle on each piece, run one piece, it's a straight cut, and that runs all the way into the corner. So you have one piece all the way to the corner, straight cut. The piece that comes over and runs into this here, you cut it at 45 degree, but then you cut the entire profile out. So what you're going to do is when you cut that, you'll see this whole raw edge, that whole raw edge is all the way cut out. So you use something called a coping saw to cut out the profile. So what you can do is after you cut your 45 degree on a miter saw, you can flip the piece over, and you can run your saw and cut that straight line all the way down before the profile starts.
Okay.
So
and when you say profile, you're talking about that sort of decorative edge at the top of crown.
Exactly. The little trim, and they all have different. This has a two-step on it. Some are just rounded over. Okay. So it just depends on the base trim you're using. We're going to set the saw to be about a 5 degree. So that way it cuts back, rather than being perfectly square, it cuts back, and that allows, if that corner's in or out, it's not going to be super, super tight. So you're going to cut all the way down to where this profile starts. So you're going to cut this profile out. And what you do is, because you have a straight piece of base, and this falls into it, you're going to cut a straight line. So you're going to start right here. This is the hardest part, is just getting started. If I should have got a new blade. And you're going to angle the saw back a little bit too. So that's the profile, and then you just trim up these little bits up to. Sometimes you can use a razor knife to hit those little bits. Over time, it's supposed to reduce cracking. So you can have this piece that runs straight into the wall, and this piece you can butt really hard into the piece, and so that's nice and tight there, and it's supposed to reduce any sort of cracking in that corner for over time.
Okay. So once you have all these pieces cut, what's our next step?
Next step is going to be, well, if everything fits well, definitely.
So you place it up there.
Yeah, test
before
fit
nailing. Test fit
test
everything.
Fit your pieces. Yeah. So if you have inside corners, outside corners, whatever you have, put your pieces in and make sure everything looks good. Make sure the joints line up. Make sure your pieces are long enough. If they're too long, trim them. So definitely go through and test fit. If everything looks good, then you go back through and you take, for this specific instance, we're going to use a 16 gauge nailer to nail the base trim.
Why would you use a 16 gauge over an 18 gauge?
16 gauge is a bigger head. It's going to hold hard, and this is a taller, bigger trim, so it's going to hold better over time. So we're going to use a heavier gauge nail. Okay,
great. And so do you also put, I know some people put construction adhesive on the back. What's your personal preference when it comes to that?
You don't have to, unless there's an instance where you have, it could be a pocket door, there could be something behind the wall where you can't necessarily nail. You would put a bead of construction adhesive behind there, and you can use a reduced depth nail and angle into the drywall, and that kind of holds a bit, but the construction, just so the construction adhesive can set up. But
so what size 16 gauge nail do you use?
We're going to use a 2-inch on this one.
Okay, great. And so then what's the next step after this? After you've got all your trim nailed up?
After all the base trim goes in, then we're going to go through and cut our shoe molding.
Shoe molding, and you're going to do the same process?
Same exact process. Same thing. You measure, go through, you cut everything, test with everything, and then we come back for that one, we're going to use a different nailer for that. We're going to use something.
And what nailer are we going to use for that?
We're going to use an 18 gauge nailer.
Why? Why would you use an 18 gauge?
18, smaller head, we're using a smaller trim. If you're using a bigger nail on smaller trim, sometimes you can worry about it splitting or mushrooming out. So a smaller head will be a better.
Great. And so this is your new 18 gauge DeWalt nailer,
it is,
correct? Can you tell me a little bit about it and why you, this was one you really wanted, it was on your wish list. Why was this tool in particular on your wish list? What do you like about it?
Well, one of the first things is it's handy. You don't have to get a compressor out. Rather than getting a compressor out and the hose and the nailer, setting it up, there's the noise. So if you're going in and you just have a little bit to do, rather than setting up a full shop there, you can just put a battery in, put your size nails in, go in and just get started.
I know the home you're working in today is fairly small. Not the home, the space you're working in is fairly small. Does that affect like when you're going to use, because you talked about like the space and like setting up the compressor, like when to use like the corded tools versus the battery tools, like as a contractor, where does your preference lie? And
that can get annoying when you have a compressor set up. If you set it up in the bathroom, it's just another thing to be in your way. If you set up
Yeah.
outside, you have the hose running through. So there's just another annoyance to be in your way. Where you have a nailer, it's just the gun.
Yeah.
Sitting down, and it's simple, it's easy, it's great.
As you're nailing in the trim, what are some pro tips? I know for me, sometimes I struggle with, like it feels like it jumps off a little. And, you know, so sometimes as I'm using a nailer, especially a pretty powerful one, I find that sometimes I don't get my nails all the way in there.
Okay.
What are some good tips for me, for maybe the DIYer at home, as you're nailing in your trim and your shoe molding?
Well, first off, check on this specific nailer, you want to check your depth setting. So there's a gauge on the side of the gun that you can choose how far you want the nail to sink. So there's applications where if you're using a thinner trim, you don't want the nail to necessarily sink too far. So sometimes you have to set that and test it and make sure and see how far the nail goes in. So definitely check that first. If it's not sinking in, it might be that the gauge isn't set. Another thing as far as bouncing off is just push a little harder.
Okay, pro tip. Okay, any other tips as you're, how far apart do you typically space it as you're nailing it in, and do you need to hit the studs?
You want to hit the stud. That's what's going to hold the trim to the ball. And when you go back later and you caulk and paint, if you haven't hit a stud, it will pull off over time. You'll see that caulk joint cracking. So you want to go through before you install the base trim. See if you can go through and find the studs on the wall. Sometimes it's easier to do it before you put the trim up. Use a stud finder to go through it. Stud finder. Some people you can try the knocking method where you knock the wall and wait to hear the denser sound. Some people use a drill bit just a certain depth. But other times you can see if there's a drywall screw down below. If you can see it, you can tell.
So that seems the easiest method is looking for the drywall screw. What's your preference in finding studs?
It depends. A lot of times I can knock and find them. Other times I can look and see if I can find a nail or a screw on the wall. If I'm doing a project from the beginning, I'll go through and mark where the studs are down below. So I know when I come through later, they're already marked out and I can just go through and just shoot.
Great. So after you get all the trim and the baseboard up, the last step is caulking and painting and filling holes.
Yes.
Any tips for that?
Using painter's putty, you can find that and go through and filling the holes. It could be a little gummy, but go through and it just makes a nice flat surface hole. Caulk tends to suck up a little bit, so you'll actually be able to see where the nail holes are. It's better to use a painter's putty. And then for the top, just using a paintable latex caulk. If you're trying to paint quickly, they do have caulk that is 30-minute paint ready. Dries pretty fast, but if you're not in any rush, you can get some that's like a 2-hour paint ready, and that gives you a little more time to work with it. But
I think I've used the 30-minute, and I'm not sure I'm skilled enough to really be able to work it fast enough before it dries and then gets a little.
But if you're not in any rush, give yourself a little more time. Don't get something that's 30-minute paint ready, and have a little extra time to get that together.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Chris. I feel like trim is one of those features in a home where it really takes it up to the next level and makes it look much more polished, much more expensive. And so I feel like if it's something that you can do yourself, it saves you tons of money and adds a lot of value to your home.
Definitely.
But I really appreciate the pro tips because I know that having it done well is well worth it. So thank you so much, Chris, for being here today, and we'll see you next time for our next Pro Follow. Bye, guys. Thank you guys all for following along for this Pro Follow sponsored by the Home Depot, and we'll see you back for the next one. Okay.
I don't know if that was all right.
It was great.
Thanks so much for watching. For more great tool reviews, click subscribe so you get all our updates.